Colonel Cheatham, what's the objective and what are your men about to do?
Well, I've got two companies here that are just about to clear the next 2 blocks up. I've got one company in this big building here that I guess is the end of the Way University, and they are going to start firing in support of Foxtrot Company, which will be going up this road here on the left, and attempt to take a couple large wall buildings that are on up about 500 or 600 meters.
What kind of fighting is it going to be?
It's house to house and from room to room.
Nope. Kind of inch by inch.
That's exactly what it is.
On the morning of January 31st, 1968, United States Marines woke up to a nightmare. The ancient Vietnamese city of Hue had been swallowed whole overnight. Thousands of North Vietnamese regulars and Viet Cong fighters held nearly every street, every building, every bridge, and the Marines who would be sent to take it back had never trained for a single day of city fighting. Hue sat along the Perfume River in the northernmost part of South Vietnam, about 60 miles below the DMZ. South of the river was the modern city, European-style buildings, a university, a hospital, a prison, and the McVie compound housing about 200 American and Australian military advisors. Now here is an important detail. Because of the city's cultural and religious importance, both sides had treated Hue as an open city for the entire war. Neither the Americans nor the Communists had conducted military operations there. Security was handled by the national police, not the military. That arrangement was about to be shattered. The nearest Marine combat unit sat 8 miles south at the Phu Bai base, home to Task Force X-Ray under Brigadier General Foster LaHue. He had elements of the 1st and 5th Marine regiments, plus a small contingent of Marine tanks and ONTOS vehicles. Inside the city itself, the only real fighting force was the South Vietnamese 1st Infantry Division headquarters and its elite Black Panther Company. About 240 Rangers under Brigadier General No Quang Trong. That was it. On the evening of January 30th, the Vietnamese people were celebrating Tet, the Lunar New Year. Most South Vietnamese soldiers were on leave with their families, and the enemy knew it. Now the seizure of Hue was just one piece of an enormous coordinated offensive. 80,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops were about to hit 3/4 of South Vietnam's provincial capitals and major cities all at the same time. Think about the scale of that. Communist planners had been running diversionary attacks against small rural outposts in the weeks before Tet, pulling American attention away from the cities. Meanwhile, enemy soldiers in civilian clothes slipped into Hue among the holiday crowds. Weapons and ammunition came hidden in festival goods, loaded on wagons and trucks. Hundreds of Viet Cong had pre-positioned themselves at gates and key intersections throughout the city. Entire NVA regiments waited in the hills just a day's march away, having slipped past an ARVN airborne task force operating in the area. 3:40 in the morning, January 31st. Rockets and mortars started hammering the city from the western mountains. That was the signal. The 6th NVA Regiment stormed the Citadel from the southwest. A 4-man sapper team wearing stolen South Vietnamese uniforms killed the guards and threw open the western gate. Once inside, NVA soldiers fanned out and opened every other gate in the old city. At the same time, the 4th NVA Regiment surged into the modern city south of the river, going after the McCV compound, the provincial headquarters, the prison, the radio stations, the homes of government officials and foreign civilians. By dawn, the Communists controlled roughly 90% of Hue. The Viet Cong banner was flying from the 120-foot Citadel flag tower. Only 2 positions had held. In the Citadel, General Truong and his staff were besieged inside the 1st ARVN Division headquarters. The 802nd NVA Battalion breached the compound defenses several times in the darkness, but the defenders threw them back every time. By 4 in the morning, the Black Panther Company had temporarily blocked the 6th NVA Regiment's push on the Tay Loc airfield. Division staff officers grabbed weapons and fought as infantrymen alongside the Black Panthers. They retook a medical billets building before Trung recalled them to thicken the headquarters defense. Truong deserves real credit here. He was determined to hold his command post and maintain control of his scattered forces. He ordered his 3rd Regiment, reinforced with 2 airborne battalions and elements of the 7th Armored Cavalry Squadron on surviving M41 tanks and M113 APCs, to fight their way into the Citadel from the northwest. They took heavy fire the entire way in, but reached Trong's headquarters by late afternoon. And here is a detail that mattered more than anyone could have predicted. Shortly before the battle, the South Vietnamese had received American light anti-tank weapons from Marines coming back from exercises near the DMZ. A Marine advisor later said those weapons saved the headquarters on that first day. South of the river, the MAC-CV compound survived 2 direct assaults from the 804th NVA Battalion. Defenders armed with personal weapons held the gates after a Marine bunker crew bought critical minutes before being knocked out by rocket fire. The North Vietnamese tried to reduce the compound with mortars and automatic weapons from the overlooking buildings, but the Americans and Australians went to ground and held on. Back at Phu Bai, General Hue still did not grasp the scale of what had happened. He thought the enemy presence was minor, so he sent a single company, Alpha Company, first of the first, riding in trucks with 4 tanks. That was his response. It was nowhere near enough. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Gravel commanded the lead elements. He brought his command group and Golf Company from 2-5 to reinforce Alpha Company. 3rd Marine Division committed a provisional tank platoon, 2 M48A3 gun tanks and 2 M67 flame tanks, ferried to the city aboard Navy landing craft. They pushed up Highway 1 toward the city and ran straight into ambush after ambush. The Marines fought through intense fire to reach the MAC-V compound by mid-afternoon. 10 killed just getting there. The M48s brought Marines in clinging to their hulls like something out of World War II. The wounded had to be moved to a landing zone about a mile away. That meant fighting through occupied streets just to evacuate casualties. Gravel told a tank crew to bulldoze a path to the LZ, destroy everything in the way. The Army's 498th Air Ambulance Company flew medevac missions under fire, their pilots navigating with French-language maps because nobody had proper charts. Wounded were flown to the Navy hospital ships, Repose and Sanctuary offshore. Then Gravel got orders to cross the river and break through to Trong's headquarters in the Citadel. The Marines pushed across the Nguyen Huong Bridge. The South Vietnamese tankers in their M41 refused to lead the assault, and to be fair to them, those thin-skinned vehicles probably would not have survived a daylight frontal charge into prepared positions. 2 Marine platoons made it across. Then the enemy opened up with everything: machine guns, rockets, recoilless rifles. The assault collapsed. Nearly a third of the attacking Marines were killed or wounded. By 8 that evening, both sides pulled back. The M48 tanks and M42 Dusters with their twin 40mm guns were too heavy to cross the bridge into the Citadel, so they stayed on the south bank, providing direct fire to support the crossing. Alpha Company, first of the first, stayed behind to guard the MAC-V compound. Now here is where the command failure really shows itself. It took the Allied leadership at least 72 hours to understand that Hue had been seized by a force equivalent to 14 infantry battalions. Reinforced by a 122mm rocket battalion, 2 82mm mortar companies, 2 75mm recoilless rifle companies, and 2 heavy machine gun companies. That is not 3 companies. That is a reinforced division. Westmoreland had cabled Washington saying the enemy had roughly 3 companies in the Citadel and the Marines had sent a battalion to clear them out. The underestimation was catastrophic. Every hour of delay gave the NVA more time to fortify their positions, dig fighting holes, build bunkers, and establish interlocking fields of fire. Lieutenant General Cushman of 3rd MAF and Lieutenant General Lam of South Vietnamese 1st Corps agreed on a division of labor. The South Vietnamese would clear the Citadel. The Marines would take back the modern city south of the river and cut enemy supply lines from the west. Lieutenant Colonel Ernie Cheatham commanded 2-5. His men had 0 training in urban warfare. 0. Since arriving in Vietnam in 1965, American forces had fought almost exclusively in jungles and rice paddies. Cheatham was going in blind. By sheer luck, he found a stack of old doctrinal manuals at the 5th Marine Regiment headquarters. A couple of them covered fighting in built-up areas and attacking fortified positions. He read them fast and boiled it down to the essentials. Gas the enemy out, blow holes in the walls, clear the wreckage. That was the plan. His battalion did not even have proper maps. They operated with 3 maps found in an abandoned gas station. Think about that. Colonel Stan Hughes took overall command of Marine forces in the city, consolidated the battalions, and they kept pushing into the southern city. February 3rd and 4 were brutal. After 5 or 6 separate assaults on the post office and treasury building, the Marines had to fall back to the university campus. That night, NVA sappers blew the main bridge over the Perfume River, cutting the most direct link between the two halves of the city. On the evening of February 3rd, all supporting arms restrictions in the southern city were finally lifted, giving the Marines unrestricted use of artillery and naval gunfire. But the monsoon shut down any hope of air support. Low clouds and driving rain kept the jets on the ground. On February 2nd, the composite 1st of the 1st launched a 2-company push toward the provincial capital and the prison, just 2 blocks from the Max EV compound. They could not move more than a single block. An M48 took a direct hit from a 57mm recoilless rifle, disabled it, wounded the crew. They patched the tank up and put a new crew in it. The Marines kept going. The fighting fell into a rhythm, a savage one. The NVA used strongpoints. They defended every other street, spider holes, rooftops, interconnected positions inside buildings. The Marines had to figure out the tactics as they went, learning through blood what worked and what did not. Their area of operations in the southern city was 11 blocks wide and 8 to 9 blocks deep. Every single block had to be taken by force. The M48 Pattons and the M50 Ontos became the most critical assets the Marines had. The Ontos carried 6 106mm recoilless rifles and could blow devastating holes in enemy positions. The tanks were battering rams and direct fire platforms. Infantry sheltered behind the armor. The tanks engaged with 50 cal and cokes. When they blasted breaches in walls, riflemen surged through and used tear gas to flush out the defenders. Methodical, exhausting, relentless. On February 5th, Gulf Company from 2-5, backed by tanks, Ontos and mortars, took the main hospital building. Next day they cleared the rest of the hospital complex and went after the prison. Hotel Company caught heavy resistance pushing toward the provincial capital. The streets were so narrow the tanks could barely turn. 2 tanks moved up to support. One took a catastrophic hit from an RPG that went straight through the turret and wounded 3 crewmen. The 90mm ammunition cooked off. That vehicle burned for the rest of the day. After 5 hours of room-to-room fighting, the Marines took the provincial capital building, and that was more than symbolic. That building had been the command post of the entire 4th NVA Regiment. Once it fell, enemy resistance across the southern cities started to fall apart. By February 10th, the Marines controlled everything south of the river. 38 Marines dead, 320 wounded, over 1,000 enemy bodies in the streets. But the Citadel? The Citadel was a different war entirely. South Vietnamese forces had been trying to clear the old city since the first days of February. The 2nd and 7th ARVN battalions with the 7th Armored Cavalry Squadron and the Black Panthers managed to retake the airfield on February 1st. 1st Battalion of the 3rd ARVN Regiment secured the divisional command post, but the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, operating without armor support, could not even get into the Citadel. The South Vietnamese troops were brave, no question about that, but they were outgunned, old weapons, heavy casualties already taken, and the NVA held more than half the Citadel with well-armed regulars dug into hundreds of fortified structures linked by interconnected defensive lines. On the night of February 6th, the NVA launched a vicious counterattack against 2nd Battalion of the 4th ARVN Regiment. Trong redeployed his 3rd ARVN Regiment to the Citadel using motorized junks on the river. By February 7th, he had 2 armored cavalry squadrons, the 3rd Infantry Regiment, a battalion from the 4th, the Black Panthers, and a company from the 1st Regiment, all inside the walls. On paper, that looked formidable. In reality, the NVA still held more than half the old city, and the ARVN could not break through. Only the Black Panthers made real progress, retaking the airfield. And here is what made it worse. Poor weather and darkness let the enemy slip reinforcements through the 1st Cav screening positions west of the city night after night. The NVA kept getting stronger. Westmoreland sent the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne into the fight, starting with 1st of the 327th. The 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cav was already trying to set up blocking positions west of the city, but they were getting mauled in their own heavy fighting. By February 10th, the Marines had the modern city, but the Citadel was a stalemate. General Truong had to swallow his pride and ask 3rd MAF for help. Cushman told Le Hue to move a Marine battalion into the Old City. On February 11th, elements of 1st of the 5th crossed the Perfume River on Navy landing craft and went through a breach in the southern wall. Alpha Company brought 5 M48 tanks from 1st Tank Battalion across on the boats. The tanks rolled into the Old City and secured the ARVN Division headquarters area. With the fight hanging in the balance, Lieutenant General Lam finally authorized close air support and artillery throughout the Citadel. Every target was cleared except the Imperial Palace. The morning of February 13th, 1st of the 5th launched its first offensive inside the Citadel walls. The scheme of maneuver was simple, and it was smart. 2 tanks leading, 2 infantry companies pushing abreast behind them. A 3rd company in reserve, Ontos firing 6-gun salvos of canister in direct support. Combined arms built on the fly. No manual taught them this. They figured it out themselves. But here is what nobody told them. The 1st ARVN Airborne Task Force had quietly pulled out and redeployed to Saigon. Nobody passed that information to the Marines. The NVA moved right back into those abandoned positions. So the Marines collided head-on with fresh enemy troops in fortified positions they did not even know were occupied. Heavy fire on every approach. They could not reach their line of departure. Next day, they tried suppressing the defenses with field artillery and naval gunfire from destroyers and cruisers offshore, rolling the barrage ahead of the advance. But naval gunfire has a flat trajectory, and friendly troops were close to the targets. It was not as effective as they needed. Brief breaks in the overcast brought F-4 Phantoms and F-8 Crusaders overhead, but the results were minimal. The clouds came back fast. The Marines became more and more dependent on their tanks and organic mortars as the only fire support they could count on. The NVA in the Citadel were better adapted to city fighting than the forces down in the southern city had been. They held the upper hand for 2 days straight, and the whole attack stalled. The Citadel's narrow streets and tight back alleys disrupted coordination between the M48s and the Ontos constantly. You lost visual contact around every corner. Radios went dead when buildings blocked line of sight. Inside the Citadel, the thick stone and masonry walls just ate the tank's standard high-explosive plastic rounds. The shells bounced or cratered the surface without breaking through, so the crews switched to heat rounds. It took 4 or 5 rounds to punch through a single wall. Every breach ate through the ammunition supply. When they could not spare the rounds, the tanks just rammed through walls. On February 13th, Marine engineers built a pontoon bridge alongside the destroyed Ankou Bridge over the Perfume River, and truck convoys started moving food, ammunition, and supplies to troops and civilians. But the supply situation stayed desperate. On February 17th, NVA mortar fire sank a landing craft loaded with tank and recoilless rifle ammunition right on the river. Both 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 5th Marines had to halt their advances at different points because they simply had nothing left to shoot. Captain Casey, commanding Alpha Company of 1st Tank Battalion, became Task Force X-Ray's senior armor commander. He pulled the Ontos platoons under his control to simplify coordination. His tank commanders showed real courage. They dismounted and went forward on foot with the infantry to scout targets. When they found the enemy, they came back and directed tank and Ontos fire to blast breaches. Then the riflemen poured through, yards, not miles. That is how you measured progress. The infantrymen had complicated feelings about the tanks. They drew fire like magnets. Debris from the tank, rounds, wounded Marines standing too close. But nobody could deny the truth. One Marine said it plain. Without the tanks, they never could have pushed through the southeastern section of the Citadel. The NVA had bunkers everywhere. The command problem was real too. Infantry company commanders in 1st of the 5th had to send armor requests back to the battalion CP, where the tank platoon leader and the company commander worked out target lists and routes together. Improvised doctrine built from nothing, under fire. Fire support coordination became a nightmare. American and South Vietnamese units were all firing into an area barely 1.5 miles on each side. Artillery, naval guns, mortars, aircraft, fratricide happened. Civilian casualties mounted. Brigadier General Oscar Davis from the 1st Cav set up his headquarters alongside the South Vietnamese Divisional Command Post to bring some order to the chaos. By mid-February, the 101st Airborne's 1st Brigade deployed south and southwest of the city, and the 1st Cav's 3rd Brigade came in from the northwest. As late as February 16th, the NVA still had 3 full battalions inside the Citadel, and they were still being resupplied. Intercepted radio traffic on the night of February 16th confirmed the enemy was pushing troops into Hue every single night, but the army units finally sealed the supply and reinforcement routes, and that changed everything. For the first time, the NVA inside those walls were on their own. 3 in the morning, February 22nd, Alpha Company, 1st of the 5th, launched a night attack, caught the enemy off guard, opened a path. By the morning of February 23rd, the battalion pushed through, and the resistance started to break. The Marines took the southern wall of the Citadel. Now the squeeze was on. 1st of the 5th held the southeast. The 1st Vietnamese Marine Regiment's 3-battalion task force pushed into the southwest. The 1st ARVN Regiment drove through the center toward the Imperial Palace. On the night of February 23rd, the NVA tried to retake 3 buildings they had abandoned, but 1st of the 5th hit them with overwhelming fire. The enemy pulled back to successive positions and kept fighting, but they had reached their culmination point. Supply lines cut, reinforcements sealed off, fighters ground down block by block. Morning of February 24th, the 3rd ARVN Infantry Regiment and the Black Panthers, with American tanks behind them, launched a surprise assault and took the Imperial Palace. South Vietnamese soldiers ripped down the Viet Cong flag that had hung from the Citadel Tower for 25 days and raised their own colors. The 4th Vietnamese Marine Battalion crushed the last NVA stronghold in the southwest corner. When the 1st ARVN Division linked up with the 1st Cav outside the walls, the Viet Cong melted away and the NVA fled west toward Laos. March 2nd, 1968, Operation Hue City, officially over. The longest sustained infantry battle of the Vietnam War to that point. 26 days of unbroken urban combat. The cost: 142 Marines killed, 857 wounded. The South Vietnamese army lost 384 dead and 1,800 wounded. The 1st Cav and 101st Airborne added 74 killed and over 500 wounded. Allied forces claimed more than 5,000 enemy dead inside the city and roughly 3,000 more in the surrounding countryside. Among the civilian population, 5,800 killed or missing, 40% of the buildings destroyed. 116,000 people lost their homes. The Marines who fought at Hue walked into a kind of combat their country had not prepared them for. No urban warfare training, no proper maps, no doctrine for clearing a fortified city block by block. They improvised everything. They figured out how to fight alongside tanks in streets so narrow that turrets could barely traverse. They learned which rounds broke through stone and which ones bounced off. They adapted, they bled, and they drove a determined, dug-in enemy out of one of the most formidable urban positions any American force had ever faced. And through all of it, no single commander had unified the effort. Task Force X-Ray, the 1st ARVN Division, and the 1st Cav's 3rd Brigade all fought their own battles, coordinating as best they could, but never under one authority. And on top of the fighting, the Marines had to deal with tens of thousands of displaced civilians streaming through their lines, people who had lost everything and had nowhere to go. When it was over, the Citadel's ancient walls were pocked with shell holes, and the streets were choked with rubble. Somewhere in that wreckage, a Marine tank sat burned out beside the Perfume River. Its crew had painted a name on the gun barrel before the fight. They called it Bushwhackers.